So a lot of parents talk to me about consequences when it comes to their kids. What consequences are the most effective to use on your children, and when should you use them and how? So I have in this video 4 tips, 4 specific rules for a consequence to be an effective one. The first rule is that it needs to be relevant. Okay. Well, that looks like it's backwards, doesn't it? Oh no, whatever. Okay, relevant. So, what is a relevant consequence? So say somebody breaks something. A relevant consequence would be to have that child fix it in some way or work a certain amount of time that would be the equivalent of fixing that thing. So say they broke a lamp. Well, lamp can cost anywhere from $20 to $100 depending on where you bought the lamp. So you either help them have them clean up the mess, which is a relevant consequence, or you have them work a certain amount to pay for that lamp. So if it's a $100 lamp, maybe you have them do a certain amount of yard work that could be relatively equivalent to $100. Because what you're trying to do is teach them the value of that item and what it means when they break something like that. So relevance is a piece of a good consequence. If somebody breaks a lamp and you smack them, it's not quite relevant, because how does violence equate with breaking something? So anyhow, just food for thought. The second one is that it's time limited. And I know these are backwards, but I wrote them forwards in my mind. Time limited. So depending on the age of your child, time limited is equivalent to how old they are, right? So a 1-year-old should only be in a timeout for about 1 minute. A 2-year-old, 2 minutes, up to about 5 or 6 minutes. If they're 5-year-old, they could do 5 minutes. If they're 6-year-old, they could be 6 minutes. Should be time limited. As they become older, they can have longer consequences, but it's still not reasonable for like somebody to be grounded for their entire life, or even grounded for a month. That's a pretty long time to be grounded for that to be time limited. And think of like all the potential mistakes a teenager can make, which by the way, they make quite a few mistakes. They're teenagers. If every time they make a mistake, it's a month, then they could be like grounded for their entire teenagerhood. And then there's no motivation for them to do anything different. They just give up on your whole parenting system. So a more relevant thing might be them missing out on a night that was important to them. Like they wanted to go to a party, but because they weren't honest with you about the factors of the party, this would be both relevant and time limited, you don't let them go to the party. You know, it's like, if you want to go to a party, you need to make sure that I know the adults that are there and that I know who I can contact in case of an emergency. If you didn't do that, sorry, you don't get to go to the party. Both relevant and time limited. But that's enough. That's a consequence, especially if it's something they really wanted to do. So relevant, 1, time limited, 2. The third one is given in the moment or very close to it. So when they're young, it does need to be done pretty soon in the moment, because actually when they're really young, they forget stuff. Literally 5 minutes can go by and they forgot exactly what they did. So for like a toddler or even to a young child, really a consequence really needs to be given right then and in the moment. That's why timeout is such an effective tool, because if like say they hit somebody, put them in timeout right away. And then you can say right away, hey, why were you put in timeout? Oh yeah, because you hit somebody. They remember it. But if you do a consequence for them in like later in that evening or tomorrow, it won't make sense to them. Now again, as they grow up, then it can change, right? Like you could change from now. It can be in the near future. So sometimes parents feel like they have to give a consequence to a teenager right away. But the truth is, you can wait. You can send them into their room, and you as a parenting team can have a powwow and talk about what you think is the appropriate consequence, and then give the consequence. Then you have time to actually think about how you're going to give them a time limited one and how it's going to be relevant to the situation. Like if they were dishonest, you might come up with something to help them to be honest and take ownership for their mistake, right? But so do know that in the moment is a little bit more for the younger kids, because they forget things. And as they get older, you can take some time. And actually, I gotta say this, sometimes you're pretty pissed off at your teenager, so it might be a good idea to send them to their room until you calm down too, because actually as a parent, you shouldn't be giving the consequences when you're ready to kill them. And that's figurative. I don't think you should ever be ready to kill your kid, but I know there are times when people are just so mad, they feel like they could snap, and And that's just not the best time to be logical in your choices. So it's a good thing to put them away for a time, think about it, talk to each other, and come up with the right consequence that you think will actually teach the lesson you're trying to teach. Okay? And then the final thing that's important is that the punishment fits the crime. Why is that important? Well, you're an adult, right? And in your adult world, your punishment usually fits your crime, right? So like if you speed, you're getting a speeding ticket. If you kill somebody, you go to jail. Or if you're violent, you get thrown into jail right away. Those are all relevant. They all fit the crime. You know, like it would be weird if you were speeding and you were thrown directly in prison unless you were wanted for something bigger, right? And so as parents, our job is to come up with consequences that actually make sense to fit the crime. So it wouldn't make sense to ground a teenager for a month if they forgot something. They forgot something. People forget stuff all the time. Yes, you want them to learn to not be forgetful, but to like ground them for an entire month for that punishment doesn't fit that crime. Even dishonesty to some degree is something that can be worked on, but like I don't know if it requires like a big like day full of chores, depending on how bad the problem is that you're working on with your teenager. And so make sure, like I said, you can throw them, like don't throw them on, ask them to go into their room, think about it, talk to your partner about what kind of punishment would fit the crime that the child did or the teenager did. But usually it needs to make sense, and it shouldn't be so big that they can't come back from it and there can't be forgiveness. So those are the 4 tips for making sure that a consequence is an effective one. Thank you. You can contact me at www.therapistsinstlouis.com if you want to make an appointment.